Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum. My name is Alex Havassy. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a secular and reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, fairness, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. A special welcome to those who are with us for the first time. By the way, is Matt here? Okay. Yeah, we invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events. You can find the events listed on our website. Please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find how to donate on our website, which is www.humanists.org. Okay, there's a rising public awareness that overpopulation and overconsumption are driving climate change, resource scarcity, and biodiversity collapse. But it's still a hard issue to discuss. In this talk, Nandita Bajaj will discuss the influence of growthism, pronatalism, and human supremacy as drivers of population growth, as well as reproductive and ecological injustice, and the implications of the silencing of this discourse on the most vulnerable, nature, people, and animals. Ms. Bajaj is the executive director of the non-governmental organization Population Balance and senior lecturer at Antioch University, and producer and host of the podcast OVERSHOOT and Beyond Pronatalism. Her research and advocacy work focus on the combined impacts of pronatalism and human expansionism on reproductive, ecological, and intergenerational justice. Nandita.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex, for the welcome and introduction. And it's wonderful to join all of you for this session. Thank you so much for being here today. And as Alex described, my topic today is looking at the increasing role of denial within culture, especially within more progressive, social justice-oriented minded people, like most of us here, that population and population growth are not an issue in our social and ecological crises. And there are a number of reasons why this denial has taken hold. And it's actually preventing a lot of good work from being done. In fact, it's getting in the way of a lot of social justice movements and ecological justice movements' own purported goals. So that's what I'll be discussing today. There will be a Q&A session after, so I will present for about 45 minutes and then I will take questions afterwards, but feel free, as questions are coming up, to put them in the chat while they're still fresh in your mind, and I can address them after the presentation. So I have a slideshow that I'll share, and yes, so my presentation is called Confronting Population Denial Amid Unraveling Crises. A brief introduction to my organization, Population Balance, which is a US-based nonprofit. Our mission is to inspire narrative, behavioral, and system change that shrinks our human impact and elevates the rights and well-being of people, animals, and the planet. And I think it's very much resonant with many of the goals of the humanist community. Some of the offerings here that we have are, I produce 2 podcasts and co-host them. One is called Overshoot, which is a research and evidence-based podcast where we discuss a lot of these crises along with possible pathways forward with expert guests. Beyond Pronatalism is a narrative storytelling podcast where I talk to individuals about the many ways in which they are challenging the social cultural pressures to define families in a particular way and how they are challenging pressures to have children or be in certain arrangements. I do presentations like I'm doing this one around the world. We do a lot of writing for media outlets to confront some of the same issues that are prevalent also in media narratives. And we write for academic journals to also shift the narratives that are prevalent within academia that are sometimes perpetuating these negative and harmful ideologies. So I've split my presentation into three parts today. One is we look at the start of human expansionism, how we as one species has come to be the dominant species on the planet at the peril of all other species, ecosystems, but also our own, our own existence. Then I talk about population denial, how that came about in culture, why people who are in agreement that we are facing so many social and ecological crises due to human impact are often unable or unwilling to contend with the fact that population growth has played a huge role and is continuing to play a huge role. The other last, I'll end with advancing social and ecological justice is what are ways in which we move forward, both in narrative shifts, how we talk about these things, but policy shifts, if anyone is involved in that, and education shifts, how we educate others about these issues. So the first part, human expansionism, starts with a brief history of how our population has grown so quickly. So this graph actually just goes back 10,000 or 11,000 years, but we've been around for a lot longer. So humans emerged around 250 to 2,000 years ago. And for most of our history, we lived as hunters and gatherers. Many argue that most of what we engaged in was gathering more than hunting. And then the reason we only focus really on the last 10 or 11,000 years is because since the last ice age, our planetary arrangement, or how we have arranged ourselves on the planet, has dramatically shifted. So we started to engage in the domestication of animals and plants about 10,000 years ago. It all didn't happen all at once. It's kind of happened over centuries and millennia, and it all didn't look exactly the same. It's different communities engaged in it in different ways, but that's around when it's believed to have begun. And over the course of millennia, we saw the rise of empires and city-states about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And something quite significant happens here is with the rise of these empires, there's also a desire for acquiring other territories, growing the property that these elites for these city-states have, they want to acquire. And as a result, there is also a competition with other city-states and empires that causes a desire to grow populations in order to outnumber other empires, but also to protect and defend those states. So two things become extremely important during that time is the role of procreation in order to grow populations and the role of militarism, soldiering in order to defend those states. And those two aspects of the rise of that civilization, basically civilizations came into being, and we have since then have had many different civilizations. But that's when it began. And both militarism and pronatalism, which is the pressure to produce more children, to grow the population, have remained core aspects of all civilizations, including the current one we're in today, which is a modern industrial techno civilization. So what's important to note here that our population overall was below 5 million for much of our history, even less than that, and that it's only in the last few thousand years that we started to see a growth in our population. And that was directly as a result of this territorial expansion of civilizations. And then in just the last 200 years, something more dramatic happened, which is the discovery of abundant and cheap fossil fuel energy, which allowed us to basically expand even faster and colonize the rest of the planet with the technologies and transportation that allowed us to go places, engage in trade, etc. But interestingly, what happens during the Industrial Revolution is our population, which took basically almost 300,000 years to reach 1 billion, in just 200 years, we have grown to 8 billion. So a lot of ecologists and scientists call this period of just the last 200 years an anomaly. It is the most abnormal period of human history for all of our existence, because in just this last 200 years, we have started to behave more like parasites rather than Homo sapiens, which, we've had for a long time a proclivity toward egalitarianism, cooperation, and other positive values, including altruism, etc. But there has been a dramatic shift in which of our qualities have been privileged. And so parasitism is what's used to describe what's happened. This here shows that we are currently demanding 75% more from Earth than Earth can provide, and also absorb in terms of the waste that we're producing. Of course, we only have one planet, so where is that extra 75% coming from? It is basically a debt that we've borrowed from other species that we have pushed off the Earth using their habitats, as well as future generations, so our kids and grandkids who will be inheriting a much more devastated, more denuded planet. And of course, this cannot go on forever. We cannot keep extracting more and more. We're already beginning to reach limits, both in energy and materials. But to the extent we've been able to do it, it's happened basically at the expense of future generations and other species. So as you saw, population grew quite quickly in the last 200 years. In fact, it is, as I said, the most abnormal period, but a lot of people engage in what I'm trying to normalize, in the same way we talk about climate denial, population denial. That, hey, it's not population that's an issue, it's the way we live, it's the way we consume. We can easily sustain 10 billion people and still stay within planetary boundaries. Why is there so much resistance and reluctance to talk about population? In fact, some of the leading groups, such as Sierra Club, talk about overpopulation as a myth, and it has dangerous connotations to even mention the word overpopulation. Union of Concerned Scientists say that we're sometimes asked, isn't population growth driving climate change? But that's the wrong question, and it can lead to dangerous answers. So we see the word dangerous come up again. And then Fridays for Future, which is a extension group of Greta Thunberg's work, says, what is the overpopulation myth? The myth of overpopulation is the belief that there are more people than the planet is able to sustain, which brings me to question, is there, for folks who think that population isn't a problem, is there ever a limit that will make them believe that population is a problem? Is 10 billion? Is it 15? Is it 20? Like, can we just keep growing? And will this position still be sustained by people who think it's not an issue? Can it just keep growing indefinitely? That seems like a scientifically ignorant worldview and ecologically ignorant worldview. But the question is, why does it exist? Obviously, these are extremely bright and caring organizations and people who are fighting for justice. Overpopulation is a scientific fact. Union of Concerned Scientists was saying, isn't population growth driving climate change? Well, the leading body on climate change, the IPCC, actually has it listed as one of the key drivers of climate change, population growth and growth in GDP. So these are the two key drivers. And in fact, new research shows that today, growth in population is a bigger driver in growing emissions than growth in average consumption. So other bodies like the United Nations, the Royal Society, and tens of thousands of scientists who have signed the scientist warning have called out population growth, growth in consumption, production, etc., as drivers of not just climate change, but also biodiversity loss, species extinction, soil degradation and erosion, a lot of the resource conflicts that are occurring as a result of scarcity, driven by many things, including population. So then here I'll spend some time basically unpacking why population is such a taboo subject. One is the idea of human supremacy or human exceptionalism, the ideology that we are the only species that matters. We can continue to take over the habitats and lands of other species and dominate them and use them as we please. And that causes us to consider ourselves, because we're the dominant species, that means we should be really the apex predator on the planet. Then there are the false population consumption dichotomy debates, like the one we saw with the three organizations, Sierra Club, the Union of Concerned Scientists, Fridays for Future, where they believe that it's not population, but only our consumption that is the problem, and specifically the consumption among the top overconsumers. So it's not that they are wrong about it. They are partially right that hyperconsumerism among some of the richest countries is an issue, but that doesn't make population a non-issue. Then the third part I'll discuss is past coercive policies, which is when we became aware of population as an issue. Some of the governments and communities violated reproductive rights in order to prevent people from having children. And the last one I'll discuss is pronatalism, which is the societal and institutional pressures on people to produce children for other agendas. So not giving people the autonomy to decide for themselves whether or not they want children, and if so, how many. So let's begin with the first one, human supremacy. As I said, it's the idea that we are the only species that matter, and we have the right to dominate other species and use their habitats and their bodies as we please. That has showed up in the form of logging, taking away their habitats, clearing land in order to engage in agriculture, exploitation of the oceans with overfishing. Of course, there's different cultural traditions around medicinal use and body parts of animals. And then, of course, the growth of our human enterprise and activities with roads, highways, transportation, industries, etc., that have cleared away other species' habitats. As a result of this expansionism, only in the last 200 years, as our population has grown from 1 billion to 8 billion, you can see the extinction of species has grown lockstep. In fact, today, species are going extinct 1,000 times faster than they normally would. So there's every species normally goes extinct, but that's called the background extinction rate. But today that's happening really, really orders of magnitude faster. And at our current rate, if we keep going in the future, that's expected to be 10,000 times faster. And it is because of this level of extinction that currently, if you look at the total weight of all of the mammals on Earth, we and the animals that we kill for food or we domesticate represent 96% of all the weight, and only 4% is wild. So if you recall at the beginning, I talked about, the last ice age. We started to domesticate animals and plants about 10,000 years ago. At that time, before that, we weren't domesticating, so there was none of this. The 60% was not there. What's now 4% used to be 99%. So 99% of all mammals, the weight of all mammals, represented wild. And only 1% of that weight was us humans. And we've been around for a long time. It's not like we were insignificant. We were managing to thrive and live in ecological balance. So that's the human supremacy part. The second part is the false population consumption dichotomy. Here, as I showed earlier, the growth in population over the last 200 years was a factor of 8. But the growth in consumption during that same time was a whopping 100 times more. And of course, marketing has played a huge part. The increase in capitalism has played a huge part in creating a lot of manufactured needs, things that we don't really need that are constantly being pushed on us. But really what's allowed that to happen is the access to cheap, abundant fossil fuel energy, which has taken millions of years to form from fossilized plants and animals. Okay, so often people will bring up this really important chart, which is the consumption distribution per capita of different countries. So if everyone lived like an average American or Canadian, we would need more than 5 planets. If everyone lived like an average, say, Indian, I'm originally from India, we would need less than 1 planet. So you can see why this is such an important graphic, because it shows that though consumption has increased by a factor of 100, it has been distributed very, very unequally across the countries, but also within the countries. So it's not like everyone in India or Brazil is living poorly, or everyone in the US is living high consumption lives, but on average, that's the difference. And it's quite stark. So of course, we must address this grossly inequitable distribution within consumption. And many will acknowledge the role that a lot of the Western countries have played in creating immiseration for other countries, especially in the global South, through extractivism, through colonialism, producing a ton of waste in our countries and sending them to other countries while taking a lot of their excess materials away from them, bringing them to our countries here. So now this is one part of the picture which is really important, but the other part of the picture is population. US is about, I think it's around 350 or 380 million, so somewhere around there. It's over 350 million people. And India is 1.4 billion people, right? So it's another billion on top. So this graphic is important, but also important is to recognize the role of population. Is currently, this graphic shows the distribution of population. If countries were graphically organized based on the size of population, not their geography, you would see India and China are over 2 billion people. And then US is over here, Brazil, etc. So you can see that by continent. And global South, which is what the term used to represent many of these countries, currently represents 75% of the global population. So global North, which is the countries, the richer countries that have been responsible historically for emitting 75% of the climate emissions, but also have been responsible for majority of the overshoot through their consumptive habits. So a tiny population big impact. We can't ignore that. But we also can't ignore the fact that 3/4 of the population, even though they don't have the same means, that will not have any impact or doesn't deserve to improve their standard of living. Because the current argument would mean that people in the global south don't have much impact and are expected to not have any impact if they continue to live poorly. Of course, we don't want that. We want there to be equitable distribution in consumption and population. But even if we took everything from richer countries and distributed it equally among the rest of the world, we would be in 75% overshoot. So we'd be still we would have still crossed the planetary boundaries. The other aspect here is it's not that those countries that have traditionally not had a huge impact are remaining that way. 88% of the next billion entrants into the middle class, so middle class is access to more material things such as cars, flights, meat-heavy diets, other kind of modern conveniences. Those populations majority of them is coming from Asia. So that's about the population of two Americas, right? There are two US populations that are now being added to the richer, high consumptive populations. Okay, so to question whether it's population or consumption is really a false dichotomy. It's a form of denialism. It's just a form of minimizing reality and scientific evidence. Both population and consumption matter. It's people that consume and, yeah. So, and normally people who have not been able to consume that much have every right to be able to increase their standard of living. The third part is past coercive policies. So when we first found out, really, like population has been talked about for a long time, for millennia, but I think it really caught our attention within kind of it entered the dominant narrative, the mainstream narrative, with the release of the 1972 Club of Rome study, the Limits to Growth study, that said that at current levels of growth in population, consumption, production, we are going to cross many of the boundaries. We are going to reach peak materials. We are going to reach, in terms of emissions, we will create climate disaster. And that we will start running into other planetary boundary limits. As of recently, there was another study done that looked at the projections of the 1972, that study, The Limits to Growth, and they found that all of the projections, even though they were done using crude calculations, are exactly as projected. So we have crossed 7 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. We're in deep ecological overshoot. We are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. So that was the study that brought about this knowledge that population and economic growth are really, truly causing us to head toward our own demise. And we need to do something. And some of the countries that were concerned about the environmental impacts of population brought about policies that were coercive, violated rights, and basically took away people's ability to have children at all or as many as they wanted. Now, some of these were not dictated by environmental concerns, like China's one-child policy was dictated by a completely different concern of an impending famine that was projecting to kill millions of people. And other countries also brought about population policies for different reasons that may have to do with poverty reduction. But regardless, it was part of the UN founding in the 1940s that population was going to be a topic that would be addressed. So many communities and countries implemented policies. Some of them went this way. They implemented China's like one-child policy, where people were punished severely if they had more than one child. Some women were forcibly had to go forcible abortions, pay heavy fines, and you will see that there was a lot of killing of infants, especially girls, during that time. And a lot of girls were abandoned. But then there were other policies like forced sterilization campaigns in India, in Puerto Rico, within the US, that targeted marginalized communities. And so there was every reason to be concerned about coercive policies. And at no point should such policies ever be thought about, let alone be implemented when it comes to looking at population concerns. But at the same time, majority of the communities and countries actually employed empowering, rights valuing methods by actually getting to the bottom of why population growth was happening in the first place. And many were wise to recognize that girls were not allowed to go to school. They were getting married as children. That was creating a lot of, adolescent pregnancies. Children were having children. Women didn't have much control over their bodies, let alone their reproduction. So they were having lots of children. So it was a lot of policies actually empowered girls and women, mainly by sending them to get higher education, giving them access to birth control, challenging some of the harmful patriarchal norms within these countries, including ours. And the result was that fertility rates around the world started to decline like radically fast. So in just a matter of decades, you can see directly as a result of empowering population or family planning policies, some countries saw a reduction of fertility rates from an average of 6 or 6.5 children per woman to less than 2 in just 50 years. Some of them saw that same change in just 20 years. And none of these needed coercive interventions. The secret was you let people choose what they want to do with their bodies, and fertility rate declines. But the coercive ones left such a bad impression in people's minds, especially China's one-child policy and India's campaign received global media attention. And I think it became conflated with all population policies being bad policies. Most people assumed that anytime you talk about population, it leads to coercive measures and people take away your right to reproduce. And I think what was lost in that narrative was a much bigger fact that for millennia, efforts to increase birth rates have been the most pervasive and prominent form of reproductive control. This goes back thousands of years to the start of city-states and empires. Whereas efforts to lower birth rates was really just a very recent and short-lived phenomenon. So when talking about reproductive control, most people just assume that population or family planning policies were the first time that reproductive control was taken away, without recognizing that for millennia, most women around the world, most people around the world have actually not had the ability to make authentic and liberated reproductive choices. Which is what brings me to my last topic, which is also my area of research, called pronatalism. The definition of pronatalism, pro being for, natalism being birth, for birth. Pronatalism is a set of social and institutional pressures that are placed on people, primarily women, to bear children for other institutional agendas. It occurs in many different forms, but I'll here remind everybody that with the rise of city-states and empires was also, as I had mentioned, this pressure placed on men to become soldiers to defend the state, and for women to reproduce as much and as frequently as possible to populate the state, to strengthen the state. And that is often known as patriarchy, has remained with us for the last 5,000 or so years. It takes different forms. Today, it shows up in a number of ways. And I'd like to give a shout out to science journalist Angela Saini, who wrote this fantastic book. It came out a couple years ago that draws on archaeological and anthropological evidence on how these different elite men who have had power over, different social classes, gender and socioeconomic class, etc., have always depended on population growth, and how a very small group of elite men came to rule and set the agenda for the rest of the world. And of course, when she says how men came to rule, it doesn't mean all men here. This really means, a set of elite people, which to this day continue to have a lot of power. Pronatalism today shows up in the form of cultural pressures, could be from family to produce grandchildren, could be from our traditions that say, well, you're not a real person, you're not a real woman, you're not a real man if you don't have this many children. It could be to pass down the family name, to preserve genealogical legacy. There's all sorts of reasons why we see cultural pressures that are all around us. We see them in film, song, art, where pregnancy and parenthood is romanticized, and you never see other family types or people who don't have children or people who are single receive much attention in media. Almost all the religions are heavily pronatalist and promote, large progeny in order to strengthen their own institutions. all systems of economic, like all economics institutions, it doesn't matter if it's capitalism or socialism or communism, require more people, more consumers. And all political institutions rely on taxpayers, military, ethnocentrism, so having more of a certain kind of people. It could be dictated by anti-immigrant sentiment. It could be so many, or it could be religious, where it's, states that are religious and political, where there is no separation. They could be motivated by having more of a certain kind of people, and that goes on in every place around the world. So every institution basically relies on more people. So pronatalism is the water in which we are swimming. It's everywhere. Here I'm going to show a short, lighthearted clip. It's a film called My So-Called Selfish Life, and it's just a trailer for the film that's a play on the word selfish, because often people who don't have children are called selfish. And the premise of selfishness really comes from political and religious leaders who say, having children, you're having children for the greater good. You're helping pay taxes, you're helping fuel the military, you're helping grow the religion. And if you don't have children, you're selfish. So it's used as a shaming mechanism to basically get people to have children, whether or not they want to.
Nobody doesn't want kids.
People cannot want kids. It's a thing.
That is not a thing.
Well, it's my thing.
I've known since high school that I did not want to be a mother.
At one point, you just declared that if I ever want to have grandchildren, don't look at me.
I didn't really ever want kids, but I always assumed I would have them.
I kept asking myself, is this going to happen to me? Does it have to happen?
What does it mean to live in a world where motherhood is our destiny? And what happens if we say no?
Remember, your biological clock is ticking.
I gotta have a baby. I gotta have a baby. I gotta have a baby.
Do you have a biological clock?
Not ticking within me, so the answer would have to be no.
There's no biological reason for that to happen.
You could list any number of honors and degrees, and somebody will still think that you're not fully accomplished if you haven't had a child.
Motherhood has increased in value yet again. It's almost fetishized in our society.
This is the real solution to climate change. Babies.
Nations need childbirths.
Babies are good for the economy.
This is by design, this life. I'm not missing anything. I didn't forget to have kids. I'm just not interested.
To have somebody tell you you don't know what's best for you is extremely condescending and insulting.
Never question my African identity because I'm child-free.
You can be an aunt or an uncle to your friends' children, and you'll be fine. In fact, you'll be great.
Don't forget to take your pill. I won't.
So that film basically shines a light on the role of pronatalism on people who don't have children and how they are basically, depicted in society. But pronatalism harms everyone. People have only one child. The question always is, well, when are you going to have another? In different communities, if you don't have 7 children, if you only have 3, the question is, well, you're not a real man or real woman if you haven't reproduced. So the question ultimately is, how much autonomy do people really have if society, whether kind of due to ignorance or leaders intently are cajoling or coercing people to have children? And an example of pronatalism from some of the recent news headlines is I showed you recently that our fertility rates have started to decline and women are having fewer babies everywhere. And there is this backlash from nation states who are using all sorts of incentives, whether it's baby bonuses, whether it's abortion bans, taking away reproductive rights by taking away access to contraceptives, by giving awards to women who produce more than a certain number of children, by taking away, giving huge tax breaks. And this is not a new phenomenon. I think a lot of people are seeing these news headlines and thinking, oh, wow, there's this new phenomenon that has really taken root called pronatalism. And the word has been in the news a lot. But this is just a reaction to people having more choice. As I mentioned, pronatalism has ruled for the last 5,000 years. And for the most part, people have resisted a little bit here and there, but mainly complied. And, in the absence of having much power, continue to have children. But as people, and especially women, are gaining more power, they're having the number of children that they desire. And some are choosing to have none. But that's what ultimate choice means. And just to also clarify that challenging pronatalism is not advocating for antinatalism. Challenging pronatalism actually just means that we are advocating true autonomy, true choice, true responsibility. Antinatalism is another form of coercive force in people's lives that shames people for having children at all. That's no different, in my perspective, from pronatalism, which is very anti-choice. So the two don't go together. The reality, as I wrap up, is that today, 650 million women and girls that are alive were married before their 18th birthday, so they were still children. Nearly half of all pregnancies around the world, including in the US, are unintended. There are over 200 million women who have an unmet need for modern contraception, some of them because of religious and patriarchal barriers. The contraceptives might be available around the corner, but women are afraid to access them for fear of domestic violence or ostracization from their family if they are caught using contraceptives. You see some of the reasons people are panicking about declining birth rates. So Prime Minister of Hungary, Orban, we will defend Christian culture and will not surrender the country to aliens. Instead of just numbers, we want Hungarian children. Migration is surrender. So this is the form of ethnocentric pronatalism I mentioned earlier. Elon Musk has become the largest mouthpiece for pronatalism. He thinks population collapse due to low birth rates is a much bigger risk to civilization than global warming. The urge to have sex and procreate has been subverted by birth control and abortion, leading to population decline. And really, under his guidance, current administration has been flirting with all sorts of bans on abortion, on reproductive health care. We've seen $10 million worth of contraceptives that were supposed to be going to developing countries to help with family planning being burned by the Trump administration. We have seen the US aid budget being slashed, majority of which was actually going to support family planning efforts around the world. So this is not some kind of, a fringe idea. This is a real ideology with very risky and harmful implications that have unfolded both socially and ecologically today. So how do we move toward a socially and ecological just world? Many ecologists have said that a sustainable population is one that for many of us alive today, was already part of the population during the time where we were born or shortly before. So my grandmother was born in 1926. During that time, the population of the planet was 2 billion. She's going to be turning 100 next year. And in her lifetime, she's seen population quadruple, go from 2 billion to 8 billion. A lot of ecologists say that a sustainable population would be somewhere between 2 to 4 billion at a European standard of living. Estimates, they change. They're different all over. Some say less than 1 billion. But the thing is, this is a population that has occurred in most people's lifetimes. We know what it's like to live with 4 billion people. So it's not something dramatic that would need to be done. In the same way that population grew so quickly, we can help stabilize and ultimately reduce it through purely empowering methods. According to the UN projections, if nothing changed in our current trajectory, no gains in reproductive rights, children's rights, we could reach over 10 billion this century. If we changed our total fertility rate by just 0.5, like just half, on average, half a child less, if everybody had half a child less, we could be at 6 billion, a difference of 4 billion in just the next 70 years. And if interventions like the current administration or a rise toward authoritarianism takes away more rights from people, we could also head toward 14 or 15 billion, although I think these estimates underestimate the ecological limits that will force us toward a much lower population through disaster. So this reality is totally possible, and it's something that all of us who are advocates of social and ecological justice should be championing in terms of challenging pronatalism and advancing reproductive rights. What are some alternative ways to think about our current narratives? We should be embracing and helping accelerate a declining fertility rate and modify policies that celebrate liberated choices. Instead of viewing our elderly as burdens, we should be treating them with dignity. Our policies should be supporting people of all ages. The biggest aspect of this change will have to be restructuring our economic model, which is predicated on growth. We cannot keep growing, and so our economy will need to change in order to serve humanity and the biosphere rather than us existing to serve the economy. And lastly, we will need to basically abandon our pretense that we're the only ones that matter and embrace a worldview that upholds Earth's ecological integrity. I will end off here, and I will open this up to questions. I thank you all for your patience, and I will stop sharing my screen. I can't hear Alex. I think Alex is speaking to the...
Oh, it's someone else's fault. Okay. I was saying I'm reminded of the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still. In the original movie, I think they were concerned about nuclear war destroying humanity. In the new one, they're worried about the wiping out of our biodiversity, and the solution was to get rid of people. And I can understand that. The other thing I wanted to comment was that and you pointed this out, that the modern economics, modern capitalism, actually seems to depend on a growing population, on more consumers, growing business. You know, and it seems to me that arithmetic should tell you there's a limit there. Okay, Deborah.
Yes, thank you. I'm with you. I think there's too many of us. We got to do something. But all the problems that go along with trying to shrink a population. I mean, it has to be done over time. You're not going to do it with wars and famines or anything. But it creates these difficulties with the demographics where, you know, as we grow older, who's going to take care of the old folks because there's not enough young folks? How does the economy support all this? All these people being retired with no income and no productivity. I looked for any book that deals with population shrinkage other than just sustainable population. I found a text that came out of Japan, unsurprisingly, but it was deeper than I can handle. So, but that is an important question. How do we manage how do we get an economy that supports this shrinkage of population?
Yes. Yes, thank you for that. One book that I recommend, which is written by an economist and is someone we interviewed on our podcast, Overshoot. So you can either listen to the episode or you can order his book. His name is Vegard Skrbek, and his book is called Shrink and Prosper. And he actually points out there are a lot of false assumptions that are built into our narratives, even around, who's going to take care of the elderly, the social security aspect, that you need to constantly add people, whether through natural means, through having more children, or by bringing more people from other countries. But that's basically a Ponzi scheme, because what we are facing today, which is a slightly higher number of elderly people compared to previous times where we had more people of like productive age. Mind you, I try not to use capitalist language to describe human beings. Productive, non-productive, burdens, capital, human capital, etc. It's all very economic language that's reduced us into these, economic members. But this phase that we are experiencing of a upside down pyramid where there are, people of older ages are more than they have been in the past, is a passing transitional phase. It is a result of a booming population in the 60s and the 70s that is basically going to come to balance in the next 20, 30 years. So that's one thing, is it's a temporary phase. There are many different ways in which we could address the shortfall, which I think really, if you think about the shortfall is mainly manufactured, we don't have a problem with not having enough money. We have a problem in the way the money is distributed. We don't have very progressive taxing policies. A lot of the government federal funding is going toward harmful subsidies, toward industries that are causing a lot of the issues that we're experiencing. There are many ways in which money could be redirected. Even a tiny fraction of money could be redirected from our huge military budget that could help take care of that temporary shortfall. So there is no shortage of solutions. The other problem with this kind of false assumption is that somehow children that are born today are going to be helping the elderly of today. Children require a lot of investment themselves, economic investment, time investment, investment from parents who are then not able to be productive, and support the labor force. And those children are not really putting money towards these Social Security funds for at least 30 years. So they're not really productive members of society until they are of working age. The other thing that is often missed here is, as fertility rates have been declining, more women, because of greater time availability, have been able to join the workforce and contribute to that kind of fund that we are talking about. So this is, I think, just like an idea that keeps getting rehashed and repeated, and it has captured our collective imagination that we need to keep adding more people to then keep paying for, some of these funds. Well, that means it's a pyramid scheme that's never going to end, because the more people we add today, they will become elderly tomorrow, which means we need to add more people tomorrow to support the elderly. So anyway, I recommend that book, Shrink and Prosper. Other podcasts that I recommend on our Overshoot is anything to do with well-being economy, degrowth economy. There are a lot of different types of economic models, steady state economics, ecological economics, that talk about a different way of arranging our economic model, none of which, it would require political will, obviously, but I think what it requires for us is to understand the falsehoods that are being promoted by current leaders. We just need to know that they are falsehoods.
All right, Zim.
Oh, I didn't know I was the first one. Well, thanks for your talk. This is really interesting. And thank you for saying Ponzi scheme. I always argue with other people on this show here. People don't like me for using that, but I view, for instance, Social Security as being a Ponzi scheme, and most other countries have the same. But I do see that you're sort of fighting two fights that are in contradiction when you talk about pro-growth policies. As far as I can tell, the greatest contributor to the slowing of fertility rates is free market capitalism, because the opportunity costs of having children are rising. And you talk about the opportunities for women. That's exactly right. If a woman were to have a child, she would forego becoming a lawyer, becoming a captain of industry, right? In the past, that wasn't the case. Not only that, but during agrarian times, you needed all the children you could have to work the land, and then a lot of them will actually not make it to age 5, right? So progress is, and I understand there's a sort of a balancing act, because you could argue as we have more economic output, we can generate more pollution, and we certainly can without regulation. But there's something I heard actually about India specifically, and you can maybe confirm or deny, that I guess in the past, India also had a population problem. I remember as a child growing up in Poland, we were always told to finish our food because children in India have nothing to eat. And I don't know if that was true or not, But from what I read, what really helps matters, or does help matters even today, is electrification. Again, opportunity cost, right? You can watch Baywatch now, which you couldn't before, right? So progress really is that, does slow population growth. Actually, before your show, I actually looked up replacement rates. The whole world is at roughly 2.2, and I think you show that in your graph, right? Which means the whole world is at a steady state now, right? If nothing else changed, we will have a constant population. So, what are your thoughts on that? That seems, I know in the 60s that was really huge, but it seems to have really leveled off. So, what do you think will happen in the future?
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of things. One, yeah, that, the two that I'm arguing, two kind of incompatible things. And the only reason I mentioned that point, it's not a point that I or my group advocate, which is to help continue to grow the economy, because we are actually, one of the pillars that we challenge is growthism. We don't need growth. But I'm saying that even if nothing were to change within our current economic system, which is the perspective from which this book was written, Shrink and Prosper, Vegard Skurbeck, he's not challenging the current economic system. He's just saying, even within the current economic system, if you wanted to really find ways, there are so many ways and still keep the economy healthy. We think that economic model needs to be, thrown in the garbage bin, because, as you said, that same economic model of growth and production and, technologization of everything has actually brought us our ecological crises. And we need to really look at other indicators of progress, such as well-being, such as ecological balance, such as, autonomy and liberal democracy within our societies, that economy supports. So the economy exists for us. So I hope that makes sense, as we don't actually support the idea of productivities, that, having fewer children helps productivity, because we don't care about the economy. We care about the planet. The second thing you said is the problem, in some ways is taking care of itself. Interestingly, the idea that it's modernity or it's the progress or development that has helped decrease fertility rates is also a misconception. The reason fertility rates have declined is not because people have refrigerators or, microwaves or cars. As you were saying, opportunity cost of bringing up children versus being able to do other things. It's directly because they have access to reproductive control, access to contraceptives, and just ability to make decisions. So the pattern that you talked about, that fertility rates are declining in the last, 50, 60 years, the total fertility rate in 1950 was above 5 on average. Today, as you said, it's about 2.2. And that decline has been seen across the world, whether the country is modern and developed, or whether they are socioeconomically not, socioeconomically poor, or even not educated. We are seeing that trend across the world, and that's because of access to fertility control. So women, whether they are poor or rich, literate or illiterate, doesn't matter, which race, which community. As soon as they have choice, they are choosing fewer or no children. And, this development agenda that we need to grow our economies and that will help fertility decline, has kind of been forced on a lot of the world, that you need to kind of develop in order for you to be considered progressive. In fact, has caused a lot of damage to other communities who were living more or less sustainably with their own knowledge systems, their own kind of thousands of years of systems and ways of doing agricultural activities, etc. So that's two things. Did I miss anything?
No,
You asked
there's a
about,
lot of threads to pull.
okay.
Yeah.
I think the last one you asked is where are we headed? And I think if things continue as they have been, fertility rate is going to continue to decline. If we actually increase reproductive autonomy, which is for every reason we should be doing, fertility rates could decline even faster. There's no reason we need to hit replacement fertility rate. We actually need to go significantly below replacement rate, because 8 billion or 10 billion is not a population we want to sustain. We want to, ideally hit 1.5 fertility rate for us to be able to decline to a more sustainable population by design, not by disaster. The disaster part, of course, is our ecological crises. The climate catastrophe alone is projecting to kill and displace over 2 billion people this century. So that's the other side of the coin, is if we don't do it through principles of autonomy and liberty, it is going to be done through natural limits.
May I ask a really quick follow-up, and then I'll shut up. What do you think is the sustainable number of people on the planet? Does anyone even have an answer to that question?
Yeah, I mean, there have been many calculations done. People say anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 billion is a sustainable population. So where we were either 100 or even 50 years ago is sustainable. And so, we could get there. We could easily get there at the end of this century, is if we really started to switch our systems.
Okay, Les.
So I agree with Zim, and I think you brought up a very good point. What's brought down the population and done it in a peaceful way without coercion is the empowerment of women, the fact that women have opportunities. And basically a lot of it is less death control. Ironically, fewer children dying. Sanitation, antibiotics, children not starving to death because we have nitrogen fertilizer, and basically wealth and opportunities out of the house. And also Social Security helps, because you don't have to have prepare for your old age by having children. I would say that some of the conveniences, like washing machines, used to have women doing all this housework or requiring servants, which is also needs people. If you have machines that are doing the housework, that also helps out in terms of allowing women to work. So to have economic opportunities outside the house to do other things than value of raising children, I think is very important. And centrally planned economies have done a very poor job of creating enough wealth to allow women to have opportunities. to make money outside the home. The other thing is we want to use the land. As you said, we want to not use all the land for ourselves. And to do that, we still don't want to starve. So we need agriculture, the productivity per acre to be more productive. And one thing is having crops that are more intelligently designed. And GMOs are the quickest way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I think, yes, what you're saying about, the empowerment that has come for women has allowed them to become more independent. And I think financial independence is something, I think we would all support. We don't necessarily need to see the empowerment of women as being tied to, helping the growth economy. It could just be seen as, well, helping themselves. Women can have careers, they can have aspirations, they can, find other things to find fulfillment from, whether it's instead of or in addition to parenthood. The other thing around agriculture, I think you brought up an interesting point, is the founder of the Haber-Bosch process, the guy who came up with the idea of the Green Revolution. What's his name? Norman Burla. He, believe it or not, was on the board of advisors for population balance for a long time. So he became famous for coming up with the Green Revolution that allowed for the productivity of agriculture, right? But in his Nobel Peace Prize speech, he said, this measure, the Green Revolution, is only a temporary measure because it just pushes the problem into the future. We need to have two things happening at the same time right now to avert famine, and disaster. This is good, but we actually also need to reduce our population because technology is not going to be able to get more out of the earth than earth can provide. Earth is limited, resources are limited. So while we can definitely have, better crops and better yields, if we're not looking at the demand side of the equation, we will continue to be in the same problem of always demanding more than any technology or any, resources in the earth can sustain.
Okay, Greg.
I was trying to get a link to the book you were referencing. What I found was Decline and Prosper, Changing Global Birth Rates and the Advantages of Fewer Children by Vegar and Skierback. Is that the book you meant?
Yes, that's the one I meant. Yeah,
Okay,
instead of Shrink and Prosper. Yes. And I put a link to my podcast that our researcher, Alan Ware, and we co-host. There are so many incredible researchers that we've interviewed there, including a recent book author. He wrote Progress, A History of Humanity's Worst Idea. And he actually looks at even the narrative of progress as being a manufactured narrative. This idea that things are just getting better and better and better, and that things will continue to get better because things have not been getting better and better. Civilizations have risen and fallen. They have come to great, achievements and intelligence, and yet they have gone down. We had a time pre-slavery when people were emancipated. Slavery, took away a lot of those rights. We've had slavery abolished many times before, but it keeps getting brought back in. We've had women who had a lot more, egalitarian societies pre-civilizational city-states, and they have fewer rights today than they had 5,000 years ago. So, he challenges some of these closely held beliefs. I'll put the link to his episode in here, but I encourage audience members here to check out the many different episodes we've covered on all of these topics.
Hey, Warren.
Yes, first off, thank you for an excellent presentation. I found it fascinating. I guess my question, and I don't know a lot about this, but it seems to me that we're currently, the world, experiencing high fertility rates as in sub-Saharan Africa, where countries are approaching fertility rates of 6. And even if the developed world in this country managed to get its act together, what's to head off a kind of combination of an ecological and human disaster in sub-Saharan Africa, as if the population there continues it could potentially triple in the coming 100 years, with billions of people living in potentially impoverished conditions?
Yes. Thank you for that question. Very, very true. I don't know if it's really safe anymore for us to say that we will be able to avert disaster. I think we're past the point of that. I think so many of the projections that we are seeing coming out of, some of the top climate and species extinction kind of biologists is that some of the death and suffering and displacement of people is baked in. And even if we just completely stopped doing everything we're doing today, the temperatures have already, gone so high in a lot of the communities that they're not going to be able to manage that. And so I think, yes, your point is like, if that continues, sub-Saharan Africa is going to see a tremendous, amount of setback and suffering. And that is part of the reason, if we look at ourselves, as a global civilization, not nation states that are kind of competing with each other and seeing whose GDP is higher, whose population is higher. We need to understand that any region that's experiencing devastation, it's coming for us just the same. Nobody's protected from this. And I think reproductive rights and autonomy and family planning policies are some of the most effective and cheapest interventions to help us avert, maybe not crises. Maybe it's unfair to say crises, because those crises are happening already for people in different parts of the world. It's been happening for other communities for millennia, right, who have been taken off their lands, etc. But what it could help do is minimize the number of people that would experience that suffering by being prevented from being forcibly born. So a lot of the children that are being born today are a result of coercion, not choice. So if we were to remove the control that are placed on many of women and actually give control back to them, we will see what we are seeing in many other countries.
Just as a quick follow-up, you made in your remarks, you made a comment that this could be coming back to hurt us, and it really could be if overpopulation or vast overpopulation in that region leads to destruction of the tropical rainforest. From both a biodiversity and a global climate perspective, that would hurt all of us globally.
Exactly.
Right, Sandra.
Yeah, hi, Nandita. I think that the word progress is a word that does not mean the same thing in different historical periods, and that as far as the economy, we need to be thinking more into the future. I don't know if it would be fair to say that perhaps women are more likely to plan for the future than men. It's kind of shocking to me that you suggest that the reason that over history, women have been coerced into having more children is so they could send them out to be murdered, to be cannon fodder, that women would allow that. It only suggests to me that women didn't have any power to stop that. Yeah. But if you look at what we are doing in the economy right now, we're only looking at the very close future and not the far future. So we're building a whole lot of houses. Everybody says, oh, there's a big housing shortage. Well, because of the huge increase in population. But if that is not advantageous, or even as you say, inadvertently, we're going to manage to lose a number of billions just due to climate change, well, what's going to happen with all these housing units that we're building? I think I've heard that in China, they're in anticipation of population growth, they built a lot of towns and now they're just empty. So could you talk about how can we plan for the real future and not the imagined future of continued growth? Thanks.
And Alex, how much time do I have? I see that.
I was thinking we might want to, about 0, yeah. But I want to thank you. It's been a wonderful talk. And we'll have it up on our website shortly. And you deserve a round of applause here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for joining and also for bringing in such great questions. Please, Sandra and anybody else who wasn't able to have the questions answered today, please reach out to me. Alex, you have my email address. Please share it with the community. You can also just contact me through our contact form on populationbalance.org. I'd be happy to have endless conversations about this. It's really the goal of our work to educate. Thank you.
Thank you.